Hello, everyone, and welcome to the paddock. My name is Henrik.
And my name is Sierra, and we will be talking about Singapore 2024 F1. This was boring.
Let's start off with qualifying.
Yeah, well, we'll start out with news
Yeah.
because there was a lot of news. The news took over the race more than the race did.
Of course, Max Verstappen scenario continues where he has been. His language wasn't satisfactory, according to the stewards on Thursday, so we were summoned to them and told to do community service.
That's so. I mean, I get why they did it. I get because again, it was a press conference. It wasn't like during the like in when he's in the car after a race, after quali. I get that because it was also discussed. Like they also brought up the topic of just cursing in general and him defending it. But Max has always been someone to not sugarcoat a lot of things. So
No.
the fact that he described his car that way is more telling, but then to have the FIA being like, you can't do that, and then Max basically protesting the rest of the weekend in terms of like not answering questions in the post-qualifying press conference and then holding his own so he could actually speak his mind. It was just 100. I saw a lot of memes being like, Lewis Jewelry Gate, Seb, Underwear Gate, Max Verstappen, Sweargate.
And that was quite interesting because the FIA slash F1 released this lengthy document on socials where they kind of discuss which rules were breached and stuff like that. So I don't really know what's next for him or for other drivers. Of course, we have Lewis Gate, Vettel Underweargate, possibly also Verstappen Sweargate, like you said.
I mean, the fact that all the other drivers are like, this is kind of basically BS.
Mhm.
Like, you had Lewis being like, I wouldn't serve it. Like, these are all adults. It's all high tensive situations. Also, I've seen so many people being like, and even drivers are like, they can't complain to us about what we say, but then, like, on YouTube or on the broadcast, they show those radio messages or anything like that. It's like you can't say one thing and then also have another thing. Like you
Hmm.
need to, yeah, like if you don't want to show it, don't show it. If you want to show it, don't make a hubbubaloo about it.
And of course, we had the reverse not too long ago in Austria, where Yuki Tsunoda was also penalized for using foul language
Uh, it wasn't
during
foul
quali.
language. It wasn't
Oh,
foul language. It was for a slur. He said
yeah, but yeah, we have.
basically said some people were idiots, but using a different word starting with the letter R. You can't say that. You cannot say that. So I understand them going after that, but for them
Mm.
to that I understand because it's more of a calling. It's a derogatory term. Whereas just saying like you miss a corner or miss an apex, almost hit the wall and you go and having a moment and being like, oh shit, like almost clipped the wall there, whatever. So I think Yuki's the most extreme case. Like honestly, the fact that they got after Max and not Yuki, I think just tells you all you need to know.
Mm. Right. And if I was in a situation like that, the Tsunoda situation, I would probably use a word that no one understands apart from myself.
So that was the first bit of news. You had the next bit of news was that Red Bull actually canceled their two liveries coming up. So they canceled the livery for this race and then they canceled the livery for Austin. So that just tells you the state Red Bull's in.
They are in a very poor state, both financially and in terms of drivers. Of course, we will cover everything that's happened in a longer episode where we cover the market changes and everything
Hmm.
in broader detail
Yes.
later on.
But I don't remember the last time they did this, but the fact that they need to save weight and they won't paint the carbon is it tells you where they are. I mean, I think this weekend was really good for them, at least for Max. But the fact that they needed to cancel deliveries, I think, is a more telling to what's going on at Red Bull than I
Mm,
think a lot of people were expecting.
true. And with that in mind, will Red Bull continue this run of form in Austin and Mexico, or will it pick itself back up?
Who knows? The other thing to note is that the McLaren rear wing from Baku, so their downforce rear wing, has been told they need to change, basically saying it's illegal. Not that I think we'll have many more tracks with it. I think maybe Vegas will be the last one we'll see it, so we'll get a different wing there. But yeah, the fact that they actually the FIA actually was like, yeah, no, you can't have this.
And we all know what the FIA can say and do, and we all know that they say a lot of things, but they can't really defend what they're saying.
And the fact that like it wasn't even like the teams did an investigation. It's more like fans of the team because it blew up on Twitter first. But basically fans of like I think it was Red Bull or I think Ferrari. I saw some Ferraris as well. It was more like you had like these detectives who watched the entire like onboards of like Piastri versus Leclerc and you see the wing and it's like you have literally them DMing like the teams or tagging them in the post being like, this is, you need to bring this up. And then the teams are like, well, yeah. And then they bring it to the FIA and it's like, check Twitter. And it's like, McLaren, no, fix that.
True. And if we were to talk about the race for a little while, I think we needed a little bit of partial boringness, not only this season, but also for the sake of the sport, really. I think we needed that little reality check. Uh,
Again, I think the only race it's going to really affect is Vegas. So I don't see them having like a big difference, but maybe instead of being first and third this race, they're second and fourth. Like
or
I don't see it being like a huge issue for them.
no, and possibly also 1-2. I'm just putting that out there.
No, I know. I'm just saying, like, if you were to be like, if people are like overreacting and being like, they're gonna like drop off performance forever. I'm like, one, it's only one wing. It's a specific rear wing they have for their low
Mm,
downforce. But also, the McLaren is just, it is on another level at this point,
yeah.
especially, I would say, in more in Lando's hands than Oscar's hands this week.
Mm.
But you have I still don't see them like their pace being so bad that they're now in like only scoring like fifth and sixth. Like they become the fourth slowest car. Like that's what I'm saying.
Right. And of course, we have the ever-growing Franco Colapinto, which is on a very good run of form around the tracks in general. He had a great time in Baku and an all right outing now in Singapore. Of course, he didn't score points. I actually expected him to do that, but no, he didn't.
I think that's all the news, so we can kind of move on to qualifying as we kind of already stated. Not a lot of, I mean, there are some major things that happened. But in terms of
There's
like
one thing
fr
in particular.
from Q2 down, it was kind of straightforward. You had the Salbas finishing P19, P20. Uh
Has to be expected.
has to be expected, especially with Zhou finishing last. I mean, the one thing maybe not expected is that Pierre was in 18th, whereas Esteban got to Q2. It's kind of been the opposite of that the last couple of weekends.
Or possibly also that both Alpines exiting Q1. That has also been an
Yeah.
instance earlier on
Well,
in the season, but
yeah, the earlier in the season, it definitely has been Pierre Gasly getting the most out of that car. Again, you could say that's because he's the one staying going into next year, whereas Esteban's leaving.
and he has also been struggling before in what was then the Alpha Tauri, which is now the V Carb.
Yes.
Of course, so keep that in mind as well. Ocon has had it fairly easy for the past 2 or 3 seasons with Alonso and that stuff. So
Yeah, the car's been with him,
so
and this year the car isn't, so.
no, and of course, like I just said, you have to keep in mind that Pierre Gasly has had to struggle with what was then the AlphaTauri, which is now the V-Carb, for quite a few years. So he knows what it's like to be in a struggling team
Yeah.
and have a bad car.
Other main notes, Lance being in P17, not really surprised
Uh,
there. He's kind of
Nothing,
back on, sorry.
well, nothing too surprising apart from the Carlos Sainz surprise exit.
I mean, Lance is just going back to this is where I say he's like so inconsistent. Like the last two races, not bad. Baku didn't finish. pu- Ran into Sonoda, causing him to also DNF. Now you have him finishing a whole 10 places in qualifying, a whole 10 places behind Alonso, who was in P7 by the end of quality. You have the same basically gap between Yuki and Daniel, which we'll get to Daniel later.
Well, his qualifying, yeah, wasn't too bad.
He was 900ths off Daniel. Well, oh, yeah. Daniel has just did not. We'll get to Daniel later because
Hmm.
that's a whole other. That is a topic in of itself for this race.
That's a short little novel right there.
Yeah, going through the rest, Esteban 15, you have Magnussen coming back from his race ban and actually was pretty quiet this weekend, which was
Yep,
surprising.
very surprising, almost shocking. He was very quiet, very contained, very
I mean,
anonymous. So,
caused himself to get a puncture in the race, had to not finish.
with what, 8 laps to go?
I think so.
So,
Everybody thought he was getting fastest lap. I thought he was doing fastest lap. I'm like, oh, this is where the menace of Magnussen comes in. No, we didn't get that.
well, who knows? He could have gotten it, but he didn't.
Maybe you had both Williams out qualifying Sergio.
Which is also a fun little quirk of the Williams pair now being good as opposed to the horrendous American and the Thai Anglo wonder.
I think it just shows that the car is actually good, which is promising for signs going in next year.
Yep, but I don't think he'll be able to fight for podiums or let alone a win next year.
It depends. I think the fact that you have the Williams being as now we still have more races to do, but the fact you had we always knew the Williams was going to be good in Monza. Baku, they both scored points, and
Mm,
then they even looked good this race. So I think you're finally seeing what James Vowles was doing in
yes.
getting that car to being more all-rounded.
Mm,
Is it annoying that maybe Logan, I'm not saying Logan what should have deserved a seat, but or deserved to stay after the crash, but is it a what could have been because you had a lot of the drivers, or at least you had Alex and Piastri who both were teammates and are close with him when he was dropped. You had both of them say he had a lot more pace. What he showed in that car wasn't what he could do. So it's a what if of being like, if that car was more suited and he got
mhm.
there, would it have changed anything?
Okay,
But I'm not saying Logan he should have stayed. Franco's doing amazing. It
mm,
will be interesting to see what Franco does on more of the traditional tracks because he's really only been in the street tracks.
except for Monza, which is purpose built.
Yeah, but Monza's its own. I don't say Monza just because one Williams is always good at Monza, but also Monza is its own beast.
Yes, Monza is its own little monster of a track.
Yeah.
Of course, it will be fun to see Franco Colapinto race on what is almost home soil for him in Brazil in a few weeks' time.
Well, basically 2 months.
Damn, it's been a long season.
But we'll go to Q3 or yeah, Q3. So who we thought would be on pole, or at least fighting for pole, changed very quickly. Of course, you had Carlos crashing in the very beginning, so he crashed on his outlap, starting his flying lap, so didn't start,
which caused a red flag
making a one lap shootout.
with 8 minutes left on the clock, mind you.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm not gonna say anything else now.
It's okay. I mean, if you do watch it, it kind of he didn't have the greatest line going into it because he did have to get out of the way for one of the McLarens. I don't remember which one at the time.
I think it was Piastri, was it? Yeah.
So just not good for Ferrari, especially because he looked really good. I mean, scrap P3, practice three, but both Ferraris looked good this weekend. I think one looked better than the other. Speaking of the other, he set a lap and then the lap got deleted for track
Yes,
limits.
yes. Same
He
went for Verstappen, of course.
in his first flying lap, yeah. I think one, he was pissed. And if you watched his post interviews, very snarky with his have the blankets work comment. But so it seemed like I think they had an issue with the temperature blankets. Like,
Hmm.
and if you I've seen videos of like it looked like they were taking a cord from Carlos' side, like a blanket from Carlos's side to go put on his side. So something broke.
Yeah, of course, we don't know what that is. If you want what can only be described as Charles Leclerc trauma, I would highly recommend watching France 2022.
I mean, it wasn't. I'm happy it happened in Q3 if it was going to happen anytime, because at least he's in the top 10. So even though Singapore is not known for passing, you can pass. So he's at least in the points to start. It's not like it happened Q2 or Q1.
No,
Um,
Singapore is kind of this better version of Miami.
at least Miami got a safety car.
Well, I'm speaking in general terms,
Yeah.
very
I
general
mean,
terms.
it's definitely more brutal than Miami, just in terms of like the heat and humidity. You had continuing on, you had Hulkenberg out qualifying the Ferraris getting to a P6. Good to see Hulkenberg back in form. You have Alonso and P7 dragging that Aston Martin to its limit and being more than the car, and then Yuki being an 8, just a solid drive. Any thoughts on those?
No, I just think that the Aston Martins could have done maybe P5, P10. I don't know if that makes sense.
Like in terms of qualifying?
Yep.
The Aston Martin is firmly in the top of Formula B. It is not anywhere. It maybe sometimes can get a Merc, but
Yeah, back of A sometimes.
but I think that's more because I don't think that's because the Aston's good. I think that's because the Mercedes is wholly inconsistent. Not the greatest qualifying from Oscar will be set in P5.
No, but again, he did manage to convert it into P3, so not too
No,
bad.
you had then the Mercs going 3-4 with Lewis in third and George in fourth. Lewis just the car coming alive at the right time.
It was 4 or 5.
Well, I'm saying quali.
Quali, sorry.
We're still in quali. Why are we are still talking about qualification. And then I think the biggest surprise of the weekend for quali is Max getting P2, just because this track has not really been kind to him. He still has not won here.
No,
Um,
he has not enjoyed the best of races around Singapore, and the same goes for the Red Bull in general, I believe.
this has not been Red Bull's track. This
No,
has not been a Max Verstappen track.
no.
So the fact that they got that Red Bull and Max could get second on the grid is very good in terms of limiting the damage that Lando, who did get pole, could do. going into his race lead or the standings lead, which
Yeah.
kind of you had to think that for Lando, he's like his main comp was, I think, in his mind, probably thinking it's going to be Charles and Carlos because they've both been up there. And then coming out of quali, he sees it's Max who's behind him. Like he probably was like, "You gotta be kidding me! Like how?"
With that in mind, are there any more talking points about qualifying?
I don't think so. I mean, besides, no, I think we covered it all. I mean, as I said, we'll get more to Yuki or get more to Daniel after the fact here. But moving to the race, we have Lando has shut up everybody. Lando can nobody can yell at him anymore. Well, they can yell at him for different reasons, but not for not leading after turn one.
They can yell at him for Hungary. They can yell at him for Imola. They can yell for various different races this season, but not for this one.
I mean, I was gonna say they could yell at him for almost going into the wall twice.
Yep, that too.
One definitely more scary than the other.
Hmm.
The safety car was like, "Will I? Will I?" And then it didn't happen.
It's like, nah, I'm taking an early vacation.
How many races now is it? Is it the last four races without a safety car? This poor
Uh,
safety car this poor driver is gonna be out of a job.
no, I don't think so.
Well, no, he's not gonna be out of a job. It's a safety car. Because as soon as they be like, "We don't need you anymore. Have a weekend off." Boom.
What will then happen?
Especially because like going into Singapore, like we had Singapore has never not had a safety car.
Well, that being said, I had high hopes for Singapore, but
I was scared with the fact that we hadn't had a safety car in Baku or Monza. We were getting Kevin Magnussen back from penalty points. It was gonna be chaos. That's what I was so scared. I was just gonna be like safety car here, red flag there. This race is gonna be 3 hours long.
and of course we had one of the more boring races of the season. I'm not say okay. I'm gonna say that Singapore was fun, but fun for someone that has watched for a long period of time.
It had its moments. I'm not gonna say it was fully boring because you had the strategy still went into play, but in terms of like I think people knew Max wasn't gonna be able to do anything if he didn't get him turn one or was able to pass by lap one. That's why I think it was so with Charles, more Charles than Carlos, just because Charles had been showing more pace this weekend. It's kind of a what if situation just because Charles did have so much pace. Yes, he didn't get past George, but the fact that he started P9, went long on the mediums, and then was able to finish at a P5 right behind George. Just it's a more of a what could have been. I think you would have had more of a race for the lead and the win between Charles and Lando, especially with Lando having those tiny laps of concentration.
But again, it's a very big if, and we will of course see what happens next time out in Austin with that whole debacle.
Max is at 331 points. Lando is at 279. He gets closer, but again, you have to remember he has to. If Max is coming in second each time, I don't think it's possible. He has to one hope that Oscar. He has to for Lando to still have a chance. He needs Max to not be finishing at least in the top three.
Yeah, or better yet, not score points.
Yeah, I mean that's ideal, but I don't think Red Bull's gonna be what you hope is that they score outside the top five.
Yep, or better yet, finish P9 and P10.
But I don't see Red Bull doing that. Like I think this was the best chance because it was Singapore. You had like I don't foresee Red Bull. I mean, unless Red Bull they go to Austin and they're nowhere, but I don't see Max having another Baku situation. I don't see him not being able to get under the car.
Or better yet, Australia situation where he DNFs.
It's like you still technically, because Charles was able to do a great recovery run, he does stay in front of Piastri, which is nice. So he's still technically in it, but I think Charles is now more fighting to see if he can catch Lando, whereas Lando is seeing if he can catch Max.
True.
But again, I think both Ferraris doing good recovery races with Charles getting into P5, getting P5, and then Sainz doing that undercut strategy to, I think, perfection. That's what I would say. Of course, by the end of it, he didn't have the pace to catch Lewis, who was dropping like a damn fly.
He dropped like a pebble. Yeah.
That's why I say I'm like, I don't know what this Merc is doing. Like, Merc is the most baitiest team. Like, I don't, if anything, it bodes well for Antonelli next year. If the Merc isn't like in the top, if it's gonna be like between McLaren, Ferrari, and Max, if like Red Bull gets their car in working order, and
Mm.
Mercedes is that fourth fastest team, I think that helps Antonelli with not being like right into the championship mix. I think it'll still be an it like they're still gonna be in the top, don't get me wrong, but I think it helps him a little bit more than it hinders him.
Or we can also have this 2022 like situation where the car is horrendous for the first half of the year, but in the second half it starts to pick up.
But I thought that was happening this year and it didn't. Because you had the Mercedes winning three in a row.
It could have happened just the other way around.
Yeah, so the Merc confuses me. I don't know else to say about it.
No.
Continuing on, we have Alonso again having sneakily good races. Once it was announced that Newey was coming, he's like, "Yeah, I'll be good again. I'll pull this tractor to its best." Whereas it'll be interesting when Newey comes in to see what happens.
True. And of course, it will be a huge loss for Red Bull when he leaves in
I mean, he
March
already left.
2025.
I mean, Newey's already gone.
Yeah, yeah, but it will kind of rub off on what will be the RB21 when that
I
launches.
mean, if you're going off what Horner said, he didn't really have a lot he had say, but not a lot. So we shall see. You had Nico finishing ninth, getting points, which he should have got last week, but caught out in the last lap yellow VSC when Carlos and Perez crashed. So good to see him back in the points.
He absolutely
Um,
deserves it after
yes.
this the little mishap in Baku.
Mm.
Uh, Not a bad driver, not a bad guy, a decent guy, but I kind of feel sorry for him going to Sauber next year. But yeah,
I mean, as I said, not that I'm saying like Steiner was an issue, which he was. You saw that in Haas, like you seen the change that they've gone this year. But the fact that they brought in Nico last year and look where the car is now compared to when it was just like Magnussen and Mick. Like look at the direction it went. I think I'm not saying he's going to change anything for next year because he's not in the car this year. He doesn't have any direction. He's not driving it. He can't really give anything. But I think it
no.
maybe gives a good I think when 2026 happens with the changes and everything, I think Audi has a nice, more solid person to kind of lead them of how to build the car. Especially since for Salva, you're looking at more of a rookie going into that seat.
And of course, we don't know who that rookie will be
Mm,
for next year. There
a
are
lot
a
of
bunch of
names.
names thrown in the mix. Colapinto is a name. Meloni is another name.
Bortoletto.
Bortoletto is another name. Yeah. So
I think Teo Porcher is still there.
reigning F2 champion.
So then rounding out the top 10, you have Perez, who again started in 13th. It was really between him and Franco for that point, which good drive from Franco in that Williams, I think showing what that Williams can do. Now for people who will say he outperformed Albon this race, yes, in technicality, he did outperform Albon just because Albon had to retire due to a on lap 15 due to his gearbox overheating. So we can't not saying he wouldn't out like they wouldn't have changed or whatever, but I'm just saying there is context clues to be had in the race.
Yeah, well, okay. He did score points with the ventilation issue last time out in Baku, but when he retires due to his gearbox in Singapore, does that come as a surprise? No.
No. I'm just saying, like, I've seen people being like, Williams should drop Albon because Franco's outperforming him and all this. And I'm like, you, first off, it's the third race. Second off, Alex had an issue in this race.
And
And
he
and
has
it
been plagued by issues for the past two races.
yeah, and
So,
I'm about to say he's qualifying last race. They left a fan in his vent. Like,
and you can't really say that when both drivers score points. You have no right to say that when not only your lead driver, but when
like
your almost debutant score points.
yeah, and I know I'm a Charles Leclerc fan, but if you're gonna ask me who I'm gonna back through and through, like I will go on like a hill and die for, it is Alex Albon. So everybody who's saying that he's gonna get dropped in 25 can piss off. I'm like, Williams is in a tough spot because I think they want Franco to be on the grid. I think he's showing that he deserves to be on the grid. But I think that's a lot of the rookies this year. So you like he's just a name in the hat in that terms. I'm not saying he's not exceptional and not a good driver. I'm just saying in
No,
terms of the rookies that we have this year, he's dropping his name as we need another team. We need to do these type of things. But where was I going with my point? I got sidetracked. But I think Williams is also going to be like, as much as they want him to have a seat, I don't think they're going to want to lose him due to the fact he'll be a very good reserve driver. And if Carlos or Albon do really well in these next two seasons together, and say like Max goes to Aston or goes to Mercedes, you do have
mhm.
you have that interesting dynamic of especially because both of them, like if it's the Red Bull seat that does open up, they're both ex-Red Bull drivers. So that does throw a bit of intrigue going into 2026.
Or if Hamilton were to retire, that would also be a very fun thing to have unfold in
Mm-hmm.
2028, if that were to be the case. So I'm saying that Colapinto Leclerc could also prove very fruitful.
As much as that would be interesting, I think if you're gonna look at who's gonna get like if once Hamilton retires, your first backing would be Behrman, as long as like he
Mm,
produces the way that he like what we've seen this season from him is what we get while he's in Haas. You would
yeah.
think he's most likely to be the one called up. Now, bringing back Carlos or maybe even throwing in Albon, because I think Albon at the beginning of this year was like rumored to maybe being like if Carlos wasn't gonna stay, like if Alex can outperform that Williams again, do we have like that type of deal? Also, I think an Alex Charles team dynamic would be really fun to watch. That is
Mm.
something like if I could choose who I would like to see as teammates, I would love to see Alex and Charles as teammates. Their dynamic is, if you haven't watched the Twitch Quartet back in the day, those two were amazing. They're great.
And another fun thing to throw in the mix would be Ocon and Colapinto if Behrman gets the call up or goes to
Hmm.
Sauber or something like that, knowing that they have Colapinto as the viable option alongside Ocon could also be very fun.
We continue on. So you have Yuki in 12th, Esteban in 13th, Lance in 14th, the Salvas in 15th and 16th, so not last. They have finished above Alpine, Pierre Gasly, and above Daniel, who took fastest lap. We talked about Magnussen not finishing. He did ticked he did technically qualify as a finisher, even though he retired on lap 57, so he did finish 19th in the race, whereas Alex did not finish at all, not classified because did stop at lap 15. So I guess we'll move on to Danny, where
Yes.
this whole where this is, I think, the main storyline for this race. So it was heavily rumored that they need to get Lawson needs to be have like 5 races, or that's the estimated number because of an old driver back in the day having a contract where he's like they had to have him race 5 races. Mind you, there are still 6 races left.
But Lawson has 3 races to his name, so
I think he had 5 because he came
no.
in Zandvoort and his last race was Qatar. The rumor is that he has to race at least 5 races this season.
Well, if it's 5 races total, he only has 1 race to go.
One, if people are saying it's 5, people want, if they say they take, this is Danny's not last race, but say they take Danny out until Abu Dhabi. You have that comparison for Yuki versus Liam. And
Yep.
then you have, say you put Danny back in the race, in the last race to get his goodbye.
Mm.
Or what you could do is Danny, like, because we do have that month break, it's easy to make that switch of being like, okay, Danny, you are done. Which, with this race, it's a little anticlimactic, I would say.
Yep. But
But
on the
I
bright
think
side, Austin is always a good place to be. So
what I'm saying is like if this isn't his last race, but say like they decide to have his last race in Austin, I think that might be a better send off than even Abu Dhabi, even though it's the last race of the season. I think those 2 races would be a better send off for him because one, he is really big over here in the States and he is really big in Texas. That is something that is made very well known, but also for him to finish the last race of the season to end his career
mm.
it's just weird to do it in Singapore. I know why they would do it because again, we have like a month break
And of course we have Mexico, which would also be a very good send-off.
for Perez.
Uh, yeah, but I'm saying that the atmosphere is kind of aligned with Ricardo's whole personality of being this
I think he would
partying
probably
guy and stuff
I
like
think
that.
he'd
So
rather I think he would choose Vegas over Mexico.
yeah, probably, but Mexico isn't really a bad send-off.
I think it's more of a send off for Sergio if you're going to do it, but that's just me. But then in the race, of course, the last lap you had Danny getting fastest lap off Lando, and then what people will say is controversial from Max being like they tell Max Danny did get the fastest lap, and Max being like, "Thank you, Daniel."
Yeah, right. So a reverse little thank you there.
Well, I mean, because Daniel's not like, yes, he is a Red Bull driver, but he's driving for RB, so you literally had Christian Horner calling over to V Carb and being like, can we get Danny on the fastest lap, please? But from what it looks like people are saying, it has been a very this the post race has been very emotional for him. It was seen he was crying in interviews and such. So it's sad like to see him leave.
Yeah. Singapore was an emotional roller coaster for you and me both, I'm tempted to say.
It's
Uh, uh,
I still so my little brain still thinks that Perez will finish the season because we've already seen Red Bull being like, no, he's staying in the seat, right? This is where my little brain goes. They drop Perez after the season.
and
Danny goes in to Red Bull next season. If like Liam, unless like I'll say Liam out like when Liam if Liam is in the seat like V Carb completely destroys Yuki, then I would say Liam goes into the second Red Bull seat, right?
and then what for VCarb?
That depends on well, I don't think Daniel because my thinking is unless Liam smashes Yuki, you have Perez leaving the Red Bull seat. You have Daniel being put into the Red Bull seat for a season as like a certified rear gunner for Max next year. And then
Mm.
that way, and then that way you have Liam and Yuki kind of battling out more Liam getting a full season under his belt before they promote him. Because again, I don't see them ever promoting Yuki.
No.
And then depending on the F2 situation, because I don't, if Hajar doesn't win, I don't know if he gets, I think he's named the reserve driver, but I don't know if he's put into the seat.
But yeah, those are good points. But we will, of course, see, and we have predictions coming your way shortly. So we can dwell on that a little bit more then. But for now,
So
that's how it stands.
So that's what my little brain's thinking is that maybe Danny isn't fully, especially like say Perez doesn't, because these were supposed to be his good four races, right? I think that's what after the summer break, these were the last four they wanted to look at. So and you gotta say after, even though he was exceptional in Baku, and I think that might just be Baku itself for him, like yes he did crash, like don't get me wrong, there was circumstances that didn't help. He did exceptionally well at Baku, but is
Yes.
Singapore, you could say it's Max outperforming the Red Bull because the Red Bull hasn't been good at Singapore, but the fact that he qualified below both Williams, and nothing against Colapinto, but if Alex was still in the race, maybe Alex is in that P10 and he doesn't let Sergio get a point.
No, and no disrespect to either of the Williams drivers, but I don't know what's happening to Perez now. We all remember the early last season, I believe. Yeah.
I
It-
mean, it's I get he says the car they said that the car has a fundamental issue and that they didn't, because Max was winning, they didn't fix it. Like I get that whole point, like don't fix what's broken if the driver who's winning is can win with it. But
but but he isn't
Max,
winning, so that's the problem.
well, now he isn't winning. But Max is, and maybe this is just because it's a Max versus Sergio thing, and Max is better than Sergio. Like, I don't think a lot of people will disagree with that statement. Unless you're like a diehard Sergio fan, but I'm like, I'm going off stats. I'm not going just because like it's a bias thing. I'm going like literally statistically. But Max did show you could get into Q3
Hmm.
with the Red Bull. So if you have this case where after this we go into the last after this month break, we go into the last race of the season, and Sergio does go back into that form where before Baku, and Liam is only on par with Yuki, I guess I'll say, or he doesn't like Yuki smashes him out of the water, but I think they want to give him a full season. Do they put Daniel in the Red Bull? Because I think it will be made note that this would be Daniel's last season, last hurrah. And I think a lot of Daniel's races, a lot of V carb races in general, their strategies have been stupid. Like
Yeah.
either like they focus solely on one driver and then they forget they have a second driver.
Well, that's just Red Bull doing Red Bull things. So,
Well, that's V carb doing V carb things because Red Bull strategies for the most part work.
well, uh, V-carb is still in the Red Bull family, so you can say that Red Bull is doing Red Bull things now because they focus on one driver and one driver only. That's the common denominator for both.
Yeah, but Alpha Tauri didn't do this bad.
No, but still, it's the common denominator now. I'm not referring to 2023 because it was different.
You had their main leader in V Carb slash Alpha Tauri slash Toro Rosso leave after last year. So it is also a different leadership in charge of the
So
sister
yeah,
team.
we had Franz Tost retiring and then being replaced by Laurent Marquis.
Yeah. So if this is Danny's last race, I'm happy he was able to finish with Red Bull rather than the McLaren team, but I think there is a slight chance that if Perez doesn't pick up, because I think it will, the rest of the season, I think will forever be a question mark of is Perez not keeping his seat for this year? I think I think he finishes out this year. Is does he do enough to have Red Bull have confidence in him to help Max when Max will have both Lando, Oscar, Charles, and Lewis, most likely fighting him for the drivers. And as much
Mm.
as I'm probably gonna get LH fans coming at me, but I understand Lewis is a fantastic person to driver in terms of adapting to certain cars, but you gotta think that it's gonna be a little bit more difficult for him to say, especially like if you compare it to like when he went from McLaren to Mercedes, it's going to be a lot more difficult for him to go from Mercedes to Ferrari.
True. It's a whole different system. It's a new country. Yeah, everything is different.
And you also have a driver who is the team has embedded so much into. Like,
Uh,
I forget who his teammate was. It Nico? Is that who he went to when he went to Mercedes?
he went to Schumacher.
You said Schumacher, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was like I'm not saying Schumacher is not a very good driver, but Schumacher was in the later end of his career. He had just come back, right, from
Yes.
retirement.
He retired in 2006, came back from retirement in 2010 in order to help Mercedes. He
Yeah,
stayed there for 2 years, retired again. A year goes by and his skiing accident happens.
but I'm just saying, like, it's a different compared to what he did from like McLaren to Mercedes. What he's doing for Mercedes to Ferrari is a different beast.
Yes.
One, because of the team and what their structure is and all that, because of like language and
Country.
country and all that. But
Mm.
you also have the younger driver, you have the embedded driver, especially if you look at his form this year. Yes, he did have a really bad middle section of races. His
And
mind,
how will he adapt to playing second fiddle to Leclerc?
yeah, I don't think it will be full on second fiddle right away. I think they're gonna try and they're gonna see who they're kind of gonna be like McLaren in a sense of they're gonna see who does better in the beginning, and then as it gets down, unless they're really close in points, as it gets down to it, like if it's gonna be, say it turns into just like a three-way fight between, let's just say that Red Bull isn't there, and it's between like Lando, Oscar, and Charles, that's where the dynamic comes into play. But I think there's so many next year's so intriguing for that fact because as long as the Red Bull's there, Max will always be there. You have Lando coming into his own, you have Oscar who is showing he has what it takes to do this.
Yes, he
And
has prowess, he has pace.
I
Uh,
think if anything, his qualifying is kind of bringing him down a little bit this year. Like if you like last year, it was his race pace and the tire wear. I think this year now it's more qualifying for Oscar.
but what will happen to him next year is the
Exactly.
question.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
will
And
it
then
be
you have
tire deg? Will it be qualifying? Will it be race? Will it be
will
the
he have it all
races?
together?
So
Um,
what will happen? Will it be a combination of all three? Will it be races? Will it be tire deg? Will it be qualifying? Will it be porpoising? Maybe or
I don't think it
four,
will
I
be
don't
poor,
know.
but and then you have, I think, like, and then you have Charles and Lewis, but Lewis is in a different situation because Lewis is coming into a new team, but he's also coming to win, and the Ferrari is showing it has the pace to win, especially after the summer break. They seem to have finally gotten it together. They fixed whatever issue it is. I mean, we'll wait to see what happens in Texas because again, we're going to a different circumstance, but I would
Mm,
say I would say that the upgrades that they brought in Monza, they paid off. But again, we'll see what happens in Texas. But
yep.
for next year, excuse me, Lewis, who is hunting for his eighth title with a new team. Now, they did bring some people over from Mercedes, so that should help Lewis a bit with integrating. But then you also have Charles, who has learned from 2022, and I wouldn't say he did make mistakes in 2022. Again, France is the prime example, but I would
Mm.
blame more Ferrari itself for the 2022 fire.
Yes, you have France 2022. You have the other way around. You have Austria that same year where the Carlos Sainz fire happened, literally.
I mean, the
Uh,
fact that they didn't after Austria, their team principal at the time literally said, "Well, there's still 10 races left. Why can't we win them all?" Like, you can't win them all because your strategy sucked.
and the prime example of a bad strategy was Silverstone that same year, which Carlos Sainz ended up winning despite disobeying orders from Ferrari.
I won't blame it on Carlos because what else was Carlos supposed to do in that situation? Like if you didn't want that to happen, you just pit Charles. But they didn't pit Charles, which put Carlos in a bad spot,
Mm.
which is like I get that like he should have listened and try and backed him up, but that screws over him. So in my opinion, it's not Carlos's fault that Ferrari sucks.
Well, they still do to some extent, but to a much lesser extent now with Fred
They
Vasseur behind the wheel. But
they're more precise, they're more cleaned.
yes, and not with the. They aren't in the we are checking era now, but they were in 2022. And if you're listening to this and thinking, what are they talking about? Please just watch Austria, Silverstone, France 2022, and you'll see why, hopefully, why we are talking about this and mentioning this as examples of Ferrari strategy being bad.
I think if anything, this shows that Fred is finally his changes have finally started to take place, which is
Yes.
good for bringing in Lewis because it makes it a little easier in terms of like when they get
Mm,
this. But I think more than anything next year, you have the dynamic of I think it's going to be the dynamic of how McLaren and Ferrari kind of manage the drivers
that's true.
because like you've already seen what's happening this year with McLaren.
Yes. I'm probably opening a lot of wounds for many people, but look at Hungary this year as a prime example of that. They decided to let Piastri win, which was to their disadvantage.
I under so my issue with Austria that happened isn't the fact that they had the swap happen. That's not where I have the issue because Oscar deserved to win that race before the pit stops because
Mm,
he did get in front of Lando and he did put a gap on Lando. My issue comes with the fact that McLaren didn't switch their strategies. So they still had Lando go first, sure, but then have Piastri stay out, I think, a lap longer as well on top of that. So you give Lando the prime conditions to do an undercut. Then you have Oscar who can't catch him. You put yourself in the situation to start because you pitted Lando first. And even Lando said, well, you should have pitted him first. Then you have for the entire rest of the race, Lando, who is showing he has more pace than Oscar. You then are like, aren't even giving him actual orders. You're like, we want to do this, like putting it all in his hands, and he's gonna be like, well, I'm gonna win. Like they never did anything, and then for the rest of the last like 5, 7 so on laps you're constantly hearing Will Joseph, who is Lando's race engineer, basically guilt tripping Lando the entire race. And the people who say like during that celebration, the people who are saying like Lando is like he's salty or whatever, it's like, dude just lost a race when he was closer to Max. Dude had just been completely gaslit by his team.
So to put it simply put, he lost a win.
Yeah, which can matter. It might matter.
He did that in Austria, he did that at Imola, Sochi 2021, which I surprisingly watched.
So it's my issue with Austria was never about Lando and Oscar because I think like if they would have just been like clear like no, Lando, give the position back and then you both can race. See what happens. Nobody would have an issue with that.
No.
It's my issue is they were so indecisive about it and didn't just give a clear damn order that it made it into the situation that it was, and that's why fans are so upset because no one wants to hear them basically begging Lando to think about Oscar in the morning at meetings. And then that takes away like this situation now it's like it falls a little differently, but for Oscar with his first two this win and then his first win in Hungary and then his win in Baku, it gave Charles Leclerc's vibes in 2019 when he first won in Spa and then Monza because again you had in Spa you did have the tragic accident with Antoine unfortunately dying in the F2 race beforehand, but it kind of gave in terms of like the celebrations because you had Charles winning a more somber race because it was like his friend died and he dedicated the win to his friend to the absolute jubilation of him winning Monza as his second. Yes, he won back to back, so there is a little bit of a difference. But it's the same with Oscar in the terms of his first win will always be controversial, whereas he's not the most energetic guy.
No,
He's he's a Kimmy personality, but you could
yes.
see the dynamic change of him winning Baku last week.
And of course, we could discuss the maiden Carlos Sainz win through and through, but it gave me that sort of vibe.
There are a lot of drivers who have had kind of shitty first wins,
Yeah.
if you think about it.
Of course, if there is interest in that, we could make an episode devoted to that completely. No
A lot of
problems.
research, a lot of research into that one.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just do the current drivers.
But still, we could make an episode on that. No worries.
But I think that I guess I'll just go over the standings quickly. Not a lot changed. As we said earlier, Max still leads with 331 points. Lando closing the gap. He gets up to 279. Charles, very big damage control, staying in third with 245. And then Piastri with 237 in fourth. I guess the main note now is that Nico Hulkenberg is now tied on points with Lance Stroll, but he takes over 10th because he's finished higher than Lance.
And that's on average.
But otherwise, that is. I think I mentioned this last time. Yeah, no, we mentioned this last time, but Zhou Guan Yu is in P20 because Colapinto scored points and he is at P19.
And of course, with Colapinto entering what was a 20-car grid became a
22.
22-car grid.
The question will be if Liam does join the grid, we will have 23 different drivers. And will Valtteri Bottas be the last of them and not Logan Sargent?
Will we have a new P20 merchant?
Well, the P20 merchant right now is Zhou.
Yes, but will we have a new one?
I'm just saying, Valtteri is still on the grid. Is he going to finish last when possibly well, Danny has 12 points to his name, so I don't think Danny's going to drop down to P20. But
No, no, with the Sabres and their current form, it's impossible for him to do that.
well, he won't because it would be Behrman first because Behrman has 7 points.
With that said, we will conclude and
I was gonna go over the constructors first
all right, go ahead.
as well.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
But Mercedes, McLaren Mercedes. So McLaren, that's what the name of the constructors called, is at 516. Red Bull is at 475. Ferrari at 441. So Ferrari is still catching Red Bull with the both good drives from both Sainz and Leclerc. Mercedes stays in fourth with 329, literally in no man's land. Aston in fifth with 86 points. VCarb in sixth with 34 points. Haas with Hulkenberg scoring in this race as well as Ollie last week. We have them in seventh with 31 points, so only 3 points separate VCarb and Haas. Williams at 16 with an eighth. In ninth is Alpine, and then Sauber in 10th with a goose egg.
So a good old fat zero.
Good old fat zero. But I think that does it.
Yep.
We have 4 weeks until Austin.
And in between that, we have predictions coming your way, and we have a summary of the Nissan test, hopefully.
The Nissan test will probably do some type of F3 wrap as well, since their season's over at this point. But look forward to that. We will see you all in between the 4 weeks, but also I will be going to Texas. So if you see me out in the grid in Texas, feel free to say hi. Can't promise it won't be awkward, but
And of course, if you have thoughts, have listened to this, feel free to share those as well with me and you on socials, of course, as is the case with every episode.
We are at _paddock on our socials, so feel free to drop us a follow.
Yep.
Let your opinions know there.
And of course, if we are watched, let us know. And if we are good, of course, also let us know.
Feel free to engage. But I think that wraps
Absolutely.
it up.
Yep.
We will see you all in the next one.
Absolutely.